Now, the discussions at the forum begin proper today, and some of the issues up for discussion today include banking in Africa, a closer look at Rwanda, the transformation of finance, the digital transformation of industries. Other topics include a world without work, and of course, new climate for doing business. And talking about doing business, what are the top business risks in 2016? Now, the fifth annual Allianz Risk Barometer identifies the top corporate risk for 2016 and beyond based on the responses of more than 800 risk experts from about 40 countries around the globe. The report covers top African business risks as well as the top global business risk for 2016. Now, joining me now to talk about these business risks is the Chief Executive Officer of Allianz Global Corporate and Specialty Africa, Delphi Modu. Thank you very much, Delphi, for joining me all the way from South Africa.
Thank you for having me again.
Good to have you on the program. Well, talking about Risk Barometer, tell me about that. What is it all about? What does it seek to achieve?
This is the fifth one that we've done as an Allianz Group. We feel that many of the companies that we insure need to review their risks every year. They need to review risk, need to assess what they could be exposed to, and then based on that, then they decide, do they mitigate the risk? Can they mitigate the risk? And at what situation do they look to insurance to transfer the risk? So that's what we do on a yearly basis.
Now, top 10 global business risk, and you've been able to identify business interruption as the number one top risk for businesses. What do you mean when you talk about business interruption? How does that pose a risk to businesses?
A simple way to explain business interruption is, let's take the case of a telecommunication company. If they were, for example, attacked by cyber, if they had a cyber attack, that means that consumers will not be able to make phone calls anymore. Sometimes that could last, an hour or two. The loss of income to the telecommunication company during that time is what we call business interruption. Sometimes it's insured. Sometimes people choose not to insure it, but it's a risk that's been growing in the past few years more and more. And the reason for that growth is that when you look at the other risks that we've identified, if there's a fire and explosion, for example, in a building or in a store, then it causes business interruption. If there's a cyber attack, that causes business interruption. So there's other factors of the top 10 that also cause business interruption.
Now, you talked about cyber, and that, of course, is number 3, as the risks in doing business, actually. You've actually explained how that cyber can actually affect the businesses. Now, at the ongoing World Economic Forum, of course, the theme there is mastering the fourth industrial revolution. Now, talking about cyber, and we know the fourth industrial revolution, that's disruptive technology. So we really cannot do without this cyber issue. So how would businesses, go about dealing with this problem, with this fourth industrial revolution we're talking about?
Yes, this industrial revolution has been quite great for businesses. It's change the way business do and do business. But what's more important is we need, as businesses, to sit and reassess. It's changing the landscape of risk that needs to be reviewed. If I take, I don't know, the example of how we're talking now about transportation, how taxi transportation has changed quite dramatically in the past few years, when now you can call a taxi on your phone, for example. You can just imagine the taxi company or the Ubers of the world, for example. If there was to be a cyber attack for a company like that, what kind of effect that would cause? They would lose revenue. We could lose millions. So it's quite important for companies to make sure that they're assessing risk, but more importantly, how are they going to mitigate those risks so that they have a contingency plan when they're attacked by cyber, when they have a cyber attack.
Okay, let's look at country specifics. What are the major business risks in Africa, for instance?
Business interruption also is a big risk for Africa, mainly because, as you see, the world has become a smaller village, as they just said now. A lot of the supplies from Africa is coming from Asia. If there's we had the example of the Tianjin port that exploded in August of this year, which pretty much put a halt to supply chain across the world. That could also affect Africa. What's been interesting for Africa is also power outages are quite a concern. Power outage also cause business interruption, which is quite a concern. So if you know that you are a country or a company that is affected, Nigeria is one example where we have power challenges here. Most companies tend to know what to do when there's no power. When you look at South Africa, where we did not have that issue for many years, but then 2014 was quite a challenge for South African when it comes to power. Businesses were not all ready to deal with that. So it's quite important to assess the risk and to have a contingency plan.
All right. Now, looking at your chart, as in the top business risks by region, that's Africa and Middle East. You have macroeconomic development.
Yes.
Can you explain that? That's number one, macroeconomic, when you talk about the macroeconomic development.
What's closer to our hearts is the oil price situation, for example, where it's been going down quite a bit. So how does that affect business? Sometimes it can be insured, sometimes it cannot be insured, but you still have to assess it. Oil prices going down, for example, you would assume that the construction industry would boom because of that, because oil costs less to be able to assess that. But we found that just because oil prices are down, that means the whole industry and the whole country as a whole gets affected in different sectors. So as a business owner, then you need to review and say, okay, in my case, oil is a problem. Does it affect my business on a daily basis? And if it does, what is the plan that I could put in place to avoid that?
Okay, talking about plan, looking at these risk factors, putting them together, how can corporates or businesses begin to deal with some of these risks?
There's different ways. One is first to understand your own capital base. Some of these risks, can you handle them as a business? If I give an example that is closer to my heart, was the attack that happened in my country, in Burkina Faso last week. And you look at the hotel that was attacked, you looked at the small restaurant that was attacked, for example. If there was no risk assessment or risk mitigation, were they expecting a terrorist attack? Was that reviewed in the risk assessment? If they were not expecting it, then it causes a major issue. So what's important is first to assess the risk, know if you're going to take on board, if your capital base allows you to pay for a disaster. If it doesn't, can you transfer that risk to an insurance company, which is where companies like ourselves, Allianz, comes into the picture, where you transfer the risk to us for a premium, and then when there's a disaster, then we're here to pay for it.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Well, I've been speaking with Delphine Madu. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Allianz Global Corporate and Specialty Africa, based in South Africa, actually. Well, we'll take a quick break. When we return, we'll join our crew in Davos. Just stay with us.